with my Module 16 case study for EDL 854. Debriefing the problem, a little problem identification. What we know is George Washington Middle School is a fairly small middle school. It's located in an old residential area in a pretty large town of Warren. Population of the school is dwindling, and the socioeconomic status of families is also decreasing as families are starting to move out into the suburbs. Community involvement, although the population is dwindling, community involvement remains strong. PTA has parents on the ready to help with after-school events. Some even can come help during the day with a book reading club. Parents typically run concessions and gates of athletic events. Booster Club requests that there's at least 2 of them at concessions and 2 at the gate for each event. Daniel Stevens is a 4th-year principal of the middle school. He's well liked by the parents, staff, and students. He works well with the students, staff, and parents, and he does not have an assistant principal. He relies on parents at events to help him with the day-to-day tasks. One of his students, Lucy, has made an all-state cheerleading squad. Her mom, Mrs. Bowman, is one of the volunteers that frequently helps at gate or concessions. Mrs. Bowman has asked for the school PTA funds to help pay for Lucy's trip to New York to march with the other cheerleaders. Mr. Stevens has respectfully denied this request based on the fact that PTA funds are designed to support all students and not just one. We also know that the following Monday after Mrs. Bowman made this request, Mrs. Bowman was running gate at the last home basketball game of the year. Mr. Stevens has established in the past careful accounting procedures to safeguard funds from going missing. Mrs. Bowman told Mr. Stevens that 10 tickets were torn and had to be disregarded. The spectator, Mr. Dumas, had told Mr. Stevens that he paid with a $50 bill. When Mr. Stevens counted the funds in front of the security guard at the end of the night, the gate funds were $50 short. That would be the amount of the 10 tickets that Mrs. Bowman said were not used, and there was also no $50 bill in the money bag. Some things that we need to know. There's a lot of open-ended stuff in this case. We also need to know who was helping with the gate with Mrs. Bowman. Did Mrs. Bowman and or the other person count the bag before turning it in to Mr. Stevens? Did they both count it? Did they count it together? Okay, we need to know what is the protocol typically if the funds do not match the tickets sold. Is there anything written in the PTA policies about funding the individual accomplishments that's going back towards whether or not we can support Lucy? We also need to know, back when it comes to the funds, were there any other large bills in the bag that the $50 could have been used to make change for? That should be a question that we ask. We also need to know if the concessions and the gate needed to exchange money to help make change at any point in time during the evening. And then there's also the problem of, is there anything that we could do to help Lucy out? So based on the case study and what we know and what we need to know, based on these facts, Mr. Stevens has established accounting procedures to safeguard against missing funds. Mr. Dumas informed Mr. Stevens he paid with a $50 bill. There was no $50 bill in the gate bag, and $50 is the total cost of the 10 tickets that were torn or not used. So we can assume that that the money was mishandled on this occasion. Plan of action. First, we're going to check to see if the 10 tickets were actually torn or disregarded. Now, we're not going to go dig through all the trash, but we're going to check the trash that may be closest or where she said that she had to throw them away at. See if we can see that right away. That might help us in this case. We're going to find out who was all working the game, who was helping Mrs. Bowman, who were the other 2 that were helping at the concession stand. We're going to find out if anyone was ever left alone with the money. We're going to find out if the concession stand needed to borrow money at any time. Or did the gate need to exchange money? We're going to double check to make sure what policies say about if cash has gone missing. We're going to meet with all the parties that handle the money and discuss the current situation, see if that kind of leads us to where it possibly went. And then we also need to obviously review our policies and adjust as needed. One review and change we could make is making sure we count the money as the administrator and the parents together and not letting anybody go home until that is taken care of. To resolve the issue, my resolution is going to promote the academic success and well-being of every student because money should be recovered to benefit all of the students. I'm going to try to do that to the best of my ability. We're going to review all the policies that will ensure that we are doing the best to make sure money stays where it should, and so it's able to benefit all these students. While reading through the case study, I was thinking to myself several times that the situation certainly looks like a desperate parent that made a poor decision. But we have to go through, I also was thinking that we have to go through all the right steps before we go accusing the parent. I also think that Mr. Stevens was right not to use the PTA funds to benefit just a single student. Obviously, those are raised to benefit the student body, not just one. Reading the case, I feel upset that situations like these actually do arise and that people can not be honest. I feel a lot is asked of Mr. Stevens in general as a principal, and then with not even having an assistant principal, that's adding a lot to one person's plate. I also feel that the schools put parents in leadership positions, and those parents may not always have all the students' best interests at heart. If we're asking parents to handle money and be in leadership positions, their natural inclination is going to be to put their students' best interests at heart, and maybe not every student. While reading the case, I value honest people that you can trust. I think Mr. Stevens thought he had that, and who knows, he might. Maybe this was a fluke deal. It certainly doesn't look like it, but you never know. I also value accounting policies that safeguard against mishandling of funds. Without very detailed policies, money can go missing pretty easily. And I also value that school districts that are able to provide adequate staff so we don't burden staff and administration. I think a school of 450 students only having one principal is going to be a rough situation for that principal. Some unresolved issues that we need to figure out. We obviously need to know what happened to those tickets for real, whether or not they were torn or if they were just disregarded. We need to know what happened to the money actually. One issue that we need is how do we prevent this from happening again? And then we need to know how do we handle Mrs. Bowman if she did in fact take the money, or any of the other parents that were involved with the money, and if they took it, we need to know how we are going to handle that situation. While figuring out this case, I promoted the effective and efficient management of the school by having careful accounting procedures to safeguard against mishandling of funds. By counting the funds at the end of the night rather just in assuming all the money was there. If we go make that bank deposit, don't ever count the money, just assume the money's there. Wouldn't have ever known that $50 was missing. And then reviewing procedures and making any adjustments that's needed, such as making sure money is counted with parents right before allowing them to leave. I think that way we're checking. If I show them right in front of them that $50 is missing, we might be able to get on top of this a lot sooner and quicker. I promoted the social learning of every student by not allowing funds to be used for just one student. I think that should be just a for sure policy put in place, and I think Mr. Stevens was right in using that. By trying not to recover the funds so that they can be used for their original extent, we can't just let this slide. If you let this slide, then who knows how much money you're going to end up losing. And then reevaluating accounting procedures to try and prevent any further loss of money so that the student experience isn't compromised. Okay, we don't want this to constantly happen, so we cannot provide the proper educational environment for our students. And then I promoted the academic learning of every student by not allowing those funds to be used on one student, having the proper safeguards in place to ensure money is going towards the students, and then constantly evaluating policies to make sure they're appropriate and up to date. with ever-changing climates in schools, we constantly need to evaluate and make sure our policies are the best that we can possibly have. That's the end of this case study. Thank you.